Hey everybody. I decided to break section 6.1 into two videos. The first half was almost 20 minutes long already, and I try not to make videos too much longer than 20 minutes. So this is the second half of section 6.1, and we're going to be talking about the pigments that contribute to skin color and some different markings that we can see on the skin in both disease and non-disease states. So melanin is a protein that is the most significant contributor to skin color. It's a pigment that we see as generally brownish black. We have actually two forms of the melanin pigment. There's eumelanin and then also pheomelanin, which is more of a yellowish red color. Melanin as a protein is produced by specialized cells called melanocytes, and then the melanin accumulates in the keratinocytes that we were just talking about in the first video of section 6.1. Regardless of a person's skin tone, people have approximately the same number of melanocytes. Okay, so in people with darker skin, the melanocytes produce a greater quantity of melanin, and the melanin breaks down more slowly. In people with lighter skin, they still have about the same number of melanocytes, but they produce less melanin, and it generally stays close to the keratinocyte nucleus, and it is in deeper layers of the skin tissue as well. So here we can see in the epidermis, we have the melanized cells, and these melanized cells are found mostly in the stratum basale. And these cells just contain more of the pigment melanin. And in a fairer skinned person, a lighter skinned person, we have less melanin accumulated in the epidermis. Melanin production is increased by exposure to UV light. So if a person spends a lot of time in the sun, we can see an increase in melanin and a darkening of skin tone. And we typically call this a suntan. As UV exposure is decreased or time passes from UV exposure, that melanin will degrade and the skin tone will fade. We have a couple other pigments that can influence skin color. So hemoglobin is the red pigment in red blood cells. And when capillaries are close to the skin surface, skin can have a pinkish or a reddish color. We also have carotene. Carotene is a yellow pigment from, we see it in egg yolks. We also see it in yellow-orange vegetables such as carrots and sweet potatoes. Believe it or not, eating a lot of those yellow pigmented vegetables can change your skin tone. I went to grad school the first time with a girl who, she had a lot of food issues, but for a while she ate, most of her diet was carrots, and it actually changed her skin tone. She appeared to have something of a kind of orangey suntan. We also can consider skin tone when we are making some medical diagnosis. Okay, so cyanosis is oxygen deficiency. We can see this when a person is very, very cold and has undergone vasoconstriction in maybe the lips and fingertips and toes. Also, cyanosis can happen when a person is choking and they are not able to get oxygen. Erythema is a red color, kind of like redness near an infection we could see. If a person has decreased blood flow to the skin because of maybe an infection or other feeling bad, sometimes this goes along with nausea. Pallor is how we would describe that. If a person lacks a genetic information, lacks the gene to make melanin, it's made by an enzyme, we would call that person or that animal albino, and the condition would be albinism. And they would have very pale skin, they would have very light eyes, would also have hardly any protection from UV radiation. So sunlight would be very damaging to a person with albinism. Jaundice is a yellow color, can be seen in the skin or in the eyes. It's due to increased bilirubins in the blood and can mean that something is not functioning properly in the liver. And hematoma. Hematoma is the fancy word, the scientific word for bruising. So hematomas generally change color over time. They oftentimes start as a purplish red as the capillaries are broken under the skin. And then as that those blood cells degrade, bruise can change colors to blue, to a greenish, to a yellowish. I'm sure you guys have seen bruises healing at some point in your life. Those are hematomas, and they can have a colored appearance on the skin. Now we're going to talk about how humans got different skin colors. UV radiation and exposure to UV light accounts for 77% of skin tone. This UV exposure protection is the predominant explanation, the predominant theory for why different geographic regions evolved with different skin tones. Areas that had a lot of UV exposure, particularly around the tropics, around the equatorial regions, having more melanin in the epidermis, having a darker skin tone, prevented skin cancer. It was helpful to survival. That came with a drawback. It allowed for less vitamin D synthesis in the epidermis. So having more melanin and consequently a darker skin tone has both a protective and non-beneficial consequence at the same time. Conversely, populations that developed far away from direct sunlight, so we're talking the far northern and far southern latitudes, they tend to have light skin because they didn't need the melanin as extra UV protection. Additionally, populations at high altitudes, think of indigenous people in South America, in the Andes Mountains, for instance, they needed more UV protection because higher altitude, there was less space for UV filtering to occur. They tend to have more melanin and a darker skin tone. Also dry climates, because less water vapor in the air, less filtering of UV light, more protection from UV light is needed. Vitamin D is very, very important, especially during pregnancy and lactation, because one of the many functions of vitamin D is helping with calcium uptake and bone formation. So this is presented as a possible explanation for why women tend to be lighter skinned than men in a single population. Being slightly lighter skinned allows for better vitamin D production. Okay, so now we're going on to some different skin markings. Your fingertips, the technical name for that is friction ridges. Even identical twins have unique fingerprints. These unique patterns start to develop fairly early in pregnancy, and then they are stable throughout the person's entire life. Flexion lines or creases, these are places where the skin folds. So if you've ever had your palm read, the palm reader is reading your flexion lines. At your elbows, the backs of your knees, places where your skin bends over and over, those are flexion lines. We also have freckles and moles. Freckles and moles are both melanized patches. Moles are elevated. Oftentimes they have hair. Freckles are flat. They're congruous with the skin surface, and they generally don't have any hair. The technical name for a birthmark is hemangioma, and these can sometimes disappear early in childhood. Sometimes they last for the duration of a person's life. These birthmarks are actually caused by tiny tumors, non-cancerous tumors, benign tumors, in the capillaries in the skin tissue.